Ich habe gute Nachrichten und schlechte Nachrichten. Zuerst die guten Nachrichten. Ich werde nur ein paar Minuten in Deutsch sprechen. Und wenn ich gestern Abend die Nachrichten am deutschen Fernsehen gesehen habe, oh, Suat, sehr gute Timing, als ein Türke in der Türkei in Deutschland zu sein. Ich entschuldige mich, dass ich nicht in Deutsch weitermachen kann, denn ich bin nicht so sicher mit meinem Deutsch, mit der Terminologie. So, ich verzeihe mich dafür, dass ich in Englisch weitermachen soll. Aber ich möchte mich sehr bedanken zu dem Karlsruher Institut für Technologie und Frau Trotha und die Freundschaft und die Wärmheit, wenn man das sagen, hier, das wir gesehen haben. I think the timing of my speech is actually, I don't know if you planned it this way, but it's perfect because I think it comes after a very authoritative speech by her before me, and I think I myself also benefited very much from what he said. And I think what I will say, what you will be hearing from me is someone who looks at the world more from a foreign policy perspective. I make my living more from looking at foreign policies of countries, specifically Turkey, but more so I look at the rise of authoritarianism not only from a domestic political perspective, but also what it means for the global international order. And given the age of globalization that we live in, I think it would not be an understatement to say that today, in these days, both domestic politics and global politics are so intertwined. Sometimes I wonder whether it is meaningful to make a clear distinction between them. But I can tell you one thing. If you are someone who cares about your society, if you are someone who cares about where the world is going, I haven't checked with Amazon.com, but I am sure Stefan Zweig's Die Welt von gestern is selling really well these days. And I think this is no understatement because it appears the world is collapsing at every corner you look at. And as a Turk, I can tell you before the rise of Mr. Trump or others, we were actually very much aware of the mechanics, the characteristics of how authoritarianism is built in our country. And I have come up with a term called aggrieved nativism. I think what we have at hand is an aggrieved nativism, an angry backlash against intense globalization for the last 30 years or so. I mean, since the disintegration of the Soviet Union, if you take that as the sort of historic milestone, it would not be, I don't think it would be wrong to say that what we see today in India, in Turkey, in Russia, now in the United States, but of all places in Poland and others, in Hungary, is really a distinct and very well articulated backlash against globalization. Because globalization did produce winners and made a lot of people rich, made the world more interconnected, and allowed for interaction between peoples of all sorts, but there were also a lot of losers of globalization. Many people were no longer advantaged as they were. They no longer had pensions, as in many post-socialist societies. Many people just couldn't cope with the pace and the complications and the sophistication of a global economy. And a lot of people lost out. If you look at the American case, for instance, a lot of the Trump base, yes, there are cultural aspects to it of American politics, the elite, the contempt towards elite, etc. But if you look at the roots of it, it's very economic. And I've written recently a paper for a book about this subject. And within this paper, I've identified 6 characteristics of how this authoritarianism that we are discussing looks like. What are the 6 characteristics that I have identified? First, nationalism. In all of these contexts, you see an immediate rise in a nationalist discourse. I can tell you from the Turkish example. Mr. Erdogan was very pro-European, put Turkey onto the negotiation table with the European Union until 2009-10. He entertained that discourse, and now he switched to a very nationalist discourse. Look at Mr. Putin and others. So nationalism, the rise of the nationalist discourse everywhere, in every example. Make America great again. Trump. I mean, he appeals. He's basically won that election with these 4 words, make America great again. A lot of people are wondering whether he actually meant to make Russia great again, but we don't know that yet. The fact is, nationalism is very much one of the most fundamental tools of this new authoritarianism. The second characteristic is anti-elitism. The elites know nothing. They're all babbling. They occupy the TV sets. They are dominating the public discourse. But in the end, it doesn't serve me. These people who are very educated think of themselves very highly. They're just not connected to me. There's a great disconnect with an ordinary American in Alabama, or with a Central Anatolian Turk in Yozgat, or in Russia, or in many other places where the world's complicated problems require complicated and sophisticated answers, requires, in effect, elites. But there are in most of these societies, significant segments, in some of them majorities, in the case in Turkey, and I probably would argue for Russia as well, who are very disconnected and don't like the elite. The third characteristic is economic protectionism. In almost all cases, I think with the exception of Turkey, in almost all cases you have, especially in the United States, you have a return for economic protectionism, or policy advocation that would seek an end to complicated economic arrangements. Look at one of the first things that Mr. Trump did was to cancel the Trans-Pacific Partnership Project. You see it here in Europe, where more and more objection to the European Union is, and you see more and more at least the entertaining of the question. We don't see a lot of in practice yet, but we see the idea that economic resources or economic opportunities should only be entertained within one's own political unit is strengthening. The fourth characteristic is revanchism and irredentism. You see it a lot in the Russian case, to some extent in the Turkish case. In Russia, it's very clear and obvious, annexation of Crimea, taking over property, land in eastern Ukraine. In the Turkish case, you see Mr. Erdogan talking about the need for Turkish territory in Iraq, in Syria, and even questioning some internationally binding agreements like the Treaty of Lausanne, which governed and consolidated Turkey's national borders, the Greek islands, etc., as well. The fifth characteristic is xenophobia and racism. Again, in all of these contexts, and I think the speaker before me also articulated it very well, there is a true Turk, there's a true Russian, there's a true Hungarian, which exclude all the others. If you're a minority, you're already gone. If you're from a different faith or a different sect, you're also out. If you, God forbid, a refugee or from somewhere else, you're already not even in the same category. But there is in the Turkish case, it's a Sunni Turk, Anatolian, speaks Turkish. In the Russian case, it's an Orthodox Christian with faith in the Russian Federation. And in all others, you see in the Turkish case, it's against the Kurds, it's against Alawites, In other cases, it's also, again, minorities. In the Russian case, again, very much people from the Caucasus or from Central Asia. But the xenophobia and the rise in racism is very clear. And lastly, machoism. The glorification of a leader, of a strong man, who is speaking on behalf of the nation. Again, I experience this on a daily basis in my own setting. But if you look at Mr. Putin, one day he's riding a horse, another day he's diving, he's finding a Greek amphibia from the sea. The other day he's with a bear. You know, he's the strong man. He's the macho guy, and you know he may have affairs with women, and that's all right. I think it's important to see. We never had. I mean, if Le Pen wins, I'd be interested to see how that image will come across as in terms of machoism. But I think these 6 characteristics are important, and I think are recognizable in all of these contexts. Now, I think what needs to be discussed here is also, how is it possible? How can it be possible that with these characteristics and these traits, this sort of politics can get the upper hand in one given political unit? The media control issue is such a fundamental issue. I cannot more underscore the significance of a fair, diverse, and effective media coverage of things. I mean, in Turkey right now, most of the public is unaware of what's going on. It's all good news. Turkey is a great country. We have a great leader. In 10 years, Turkey will be one of the largest 10 economies. We are doing great. This is exactly what you're getting from television. I mean, there was one famous historian he had a famous quote the other day. He said, I look at the television, it looks like Switzerland, and then I look out of my window, it looks like Syria. You know, this is really what it is. If you look at Putin in Russia, I mean, they are extremely well done. Just go on YouTube and search for videos made by media sources close to the Kremlin, and they are very well done. I mean, technologically very well done, and with content that can convince large masses. Because we live in an age where many complicated problems and questions do not always have easy answers, and then one of the tricks of authoritarians that they provide easy answers. Make America great again. Great. Who doesn't want that if you're American? Make America great again. What does that mean? How are you going to do that? The next thing that I want to talk about is, and this is something that I have been thinking lately about, is when you look at these contexts, and I have to admit I'm not familiar so much with the Polish one or the Hungarian one, but I'm pretty sure there are some similarities. The rise of authoritarianism is actually a means of transferring national resources to parts of society that normally would not have access to it. I mean, if in a democratic society, in a liberal order that is in favor of globalization, there is, and this is a fault of our systems, and actually a criticism of globalization, there are segments of societies who would not get benefits and resources enough. And I think the attempt to take over the state, to dominate national discourse, to dominate the media, enriches the elites of this new authoritarian order, but also transfers significant national resources to segments of societies who normally would not have access to it. And here I have a criticism to us, to people who believe in a liberal democratic society and who also are in favor of globalization. I think we missed a great opportunity in 2008 during the global economic crisis. We did not do what had to be done. we did not punish those banks who were selling 6, 7 times house loans to people, and then in the end we didn't know who owned the loan. Those banks were rescued in the United States, and those elites got away with it. And one reason why Bernie Sanders' discourse in the United States took hold is because he articulated it really well. Because there is a problem with capitalism, there is a problem with income distribution, there is a problem with the welfare state, especially in the United States. So we have only postponed the problem. We haven't solved the problem. And as long as it's not solved, authoritarians and people that I have just described have a chance to take over governments in many of these countries. Because in the end, and I was in politics, in the end, the ordinary electorate cares about how much money is in his pocket. Yes, ideology is important, you know, the worldview is important, what religion you practice is somewhat important, but when it really comes down to it, what the gut feeling, why people vote, they vote for a better economic future. They don't want to lose money, their house, or opportunities. They want a better future for themselves and for their kids. And as long as we do not treat the problems of globalization, if someone can set up a website and make billions of dollars and can get away in some safe havens in some sort of island bank and evades taxation, there's a problem. We have to admit that. I mean, Germany is, you know, this is a welfare state. This is not a good example. But look at the United States. I mean, I was astounded when I, for the first time, had to go to a hospital in the United States. I mean, it is horrible. You cannot get any service. And now they are trying to repeal it with Trump, what Obama has to some people, not all Americans. But all of this is, you can make billions American dollars in the United States. You can evade taxation, and you do not respond and fulfill your social responsibility as someone who's made a lot of money out of this system. So I think we need to think, liberal Democrats, people who are in favor of open societies, we have a responsibility to rethink how income distribution, taxation, we need to think about measures. I'm not an economist, I would not be the right guy to ask, but we need to think of measures so that people cannot get away with stashing their billions of dollars in some island which I cannot find on the map. And then lastly, I want to say something about the international order, where I also have a criticism. The post-World War II order, the United Nations Security Council, the system we have right now, has served for decades, I think, amicably, and you know, it was not a perfect system, but it has served for a long time, especially during the Cold War years and in the immediate aftermath. But I think now the current international system does not respond to the realities on the ground. One reason why authoritarians rise, like in Russia, who has a grievance of losing its superpower status, and others, look at India and others, there is a problem with the international order. I know the international order never reforms unless it has to. Either it's war, or it's a catastrophe, or something else. But I think when we think about the question of authoritarianism, we also need to figure in, we should not only think of domestic issues or characteristics that are pertinent to a national political unit, but also the international order. The international order currently also breeds injustices, inequalities that allow authoritarians to rise in their respected orders. I was just shown the 1-minute sign, and in good fashion, I will not even use that 1-minute line. I would like to thank you for your patience, and I hope next time I come here, or if I come here, I will speak it. I will maybe be able to make it in German. Dankeschön.